liked it. It was sort of Mexico viewed through the lens of an expat, and it was really informative. And so we're all keen to hear what you have to say today about Greece and troubles Greece got into, how it dealt with it, and what's going on now, and the read across to the U.S. because it was only last year that you moved from the U.S. back to Greece. So without further ado, Stav, the floor is yours. Take it away.
Yeah, and thanks. Do I get anything for being a first-time speaker? Because I couldn't even get on the phone. I've never done this before, so this is the first time I actually speaking at these.
Yeah,
And
stop.
any
Yeah,
and
yeah. Stop. You and I are gonna have words later. Don't worry about it. So
you
go
always
ahead.
got words later for me. But the word started 39 years ago. So I just got hired at Putnam International Equity Fund by Walter Oxley, who at that time had top 10 mutual fund record, and I was fortunate enough to be hired by him. They sent me to a lunch at the Meridian Hotel. It was a French company, leisure company, that was doing an ADR, American Depository Receipt, on the American Stock Exchange. So I'm green as an apple. I walk into this room, a bunch of seasoned fund managers, different tables. But I noticed one table in particular had a little more energy and excitement and fun. So I said that must be the cool table. And there's one guy in particular who was holding court there. So I sat down and then had a good time. And then the meeting started and blah blah blah. And then the questions and Q&A starts. And my dad, who we came to America because of my father, he was a professor of 49 years at Boston College, always told me you always know someone, the subject matter expert, the way they ask the questions. And all of a sudden, that guy who was holding court starts these laser questions. I go, holy moly, where did this come from? And I'm taking notes and everything, and it was really informative. And so I left. I go, by the way, who was that guy? And he goes, oh, it's George Noble. He runs the Fidelity Overseas Fund. I go, oh, that's who George Noble is. So I go to my office, I look at his record, and I go, oh, shit, this guy is number one rated fund in the country. So that's how it started. I didn't get to see you very much till you gave me a call and we met up in Tokyo. I got sent over to Japan from 89, 90, 91, investing in Japan and Asia. And our friendship started then. So that was 39 years ago. And by the way, you're still holding court and you still have the coolest spaces in the coolest table in the room. So congrats on that. So my career has been basically buy side, hedge funds, institutional money managing. I started internally running a research outfit on my own because as I was going through the 90s, I realized that data, the volume, the variety, and the most important, velocity was increasing, and I needed something to sort of map out what's really going on in different cycles. Because oftentimes when we know what's going on and everything lines up, you don't need to ask anybody. You know what to do. But most times cycles are conflicted, and that's where we spend most of our time. So I built Vestmo mostly for uh, improving my mental capital as opposed to my financial capital, and it's built on cycles, 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 and mostly the drivers behind the cycles. And if you can understand them all and aggregate them, you can have a deeper insights because our industry is very fragmented. We have analysts who cover various sectors. We have asset class specialists. We also break up the industry in time. We have traders who look at the short term, and their factors are completely different than the strategist who's looking at it longer term. The different factors work over different time frames. So if you're trading, you don't care about demographics, and if you're a long-term investor, you really don't care about what the earnings were today. So by adding these all together, you tend to find value, and you can start to make predictive value. So all of a sudden, things that you didn't think are related are related. So I tell people Japan, Greece, and the U.S. all have something in common. So when the Greek market blew up back in 2010, 11, we'll go through that in a second. I said to people, yeah, there are things in Greece that are particular to Greece and probably there no exist nowhere else. But it's going to come to the U.S. soon because the same drivers are behind Greece are also in the U.S. It's just coming first to Greece because of a variety of reasons. And then it's really a question of how each country deals with it and how we get there. But we'll talk about that in a second. So, George, I don't know. How would you like me to start? Maybe just I
Yeah,
gave
so
you
let's
some.
yeah, so stop. I will throw up some of the charts you shared with me. So
Yeah.
just to set the table, so Greece. Let's go back. I guess it starts much further back, but Greece was stuck in still part of the euro, and you may want to talk about how a lot of the southern European economies, once they joined the ERM, the exchange rate mechanism, and they're in the euro,
Yeah.
and how the debt. So maybe set the context for people, because I think a lot of folks maybe don't fully appreciate the details of how this went down. But let's try to get through it quickly so you can talk about what I think the really interesting part is once Greece. I mean, Greece. All right, Greece had a huge debt problem, and you might want to talk about how they went crazy on debt because once interest
Mhm.
rates came down because they joined the Deutschmark. So maybe just set the table, explain how that whole problem got started.
Sure. And just a little background, I was born in Greece. I left when I was 7. My parents brought me to Boston where they teach, but we had the summer, so I was able to come back and forth pretty much my whole life. So I was raised in a Greek fishing village in the summers and Newton, Mass in the winters. So, and then professionally, I was an international and emerging market equity analyst, so and fund manager. So I can see it from both from the personal side and also for the stock market side. But anyway, back to what George was saying. So the real story started back in, and I have a chart there. I think George, you have one
Yeah,
that shows.
I'll throw it up.
He
Stop.
called it the Great Convergence story. It was the pigs. It was Portugal. It was Italy. It was Greece and Spain. And basically, in the 80s and 90s, it was all about coming into the euro and conforming, basically trying to lose weight because their budget deficits were bigger than the 3% deficit that was required. So rates in Greece came from 25% in drachmas down to very low rates when they entered the euro. I think it was sometime early in 2000. And that's very significant when they entered the euro because they basically met the criteria, even though later we found out it was fudged. They basically lost a lot of weight. Once they got into the euro, they went to the buffet table and started eating.
Right,
And
yeah,
started
and so stop. Just so you know, the chart is now up in the nest. People can see it, and
exactly.
so you can
Yeah.
you can see it if you want to speak to it in more detail. Go ahead.
So when it was drachmas, and they're always running into problems. They could always use the printing press to inflate their way out. So the significance is it's sort of like they got in, they got their rates very low. People started giving them capital. There was a lot of inflow into Greece. It was very unlevered, especially in the private sector because they couldn't get any loans, and interest rates were very high. And all of a sudden, capital because now it's the euro and it's backed by Europe, and all of a sudden rates came down. The stock market boomed. And from 2000 and 2000 till the crisis, Greece just boomed. There was a lot of liquidity, a lot of money came into the market, and the problem was the government never did any adjustments. That when you do get this kind of higher, you get the benefit of lower rates and being in the euro, you also had to make structural adjustments, and they never did. So when the crisis came in '08. And as we say, when the liquidity bubble kind of bursts, we get to know who's wearing the swimming trunks and who isn't. And Greece wasn't. Their deficits were much higher. You had a big underground economy that nobody was paying taxes on. That we were an aging population, and that's really the thread between Japan, Greece, and the U.S. And they all had different aging populations, and I think Japan had a 2-year baby boom, and the Greeks had 15. The U.S. a little longer. But usually, when your society starts to age, when those baby boomers pass through the 40s and 50s, the economy goes through a natural slowdown. Unfortunately, you have to fund these pensions, and you come up short in effect. So debt starts to rise because governments start to borrow because they got to keep the economy growing, and every time there's a crisis, you spend more money. So Greece, it was the real turning point came in 2000 when they gave up the drachma because they basically gave away their printing press. There was no way to print your way out of this one, so to speak. So we got a glimpse of what happens when you can't print your way out. Japan, they can print their way out. US has the best printing machine in the world. They can print their way out and prolong the inevitable, but the inevitable is coming. I always tell people you're on the Titanic, but you may not have left the harbor yet, so might as well enjoy yourself and have a party because you can still need to make money. But in Greece's point, they couldn't print. They were at the mercy of the ECB. So all of a sudden, what do you do? So the what happened was the Europeans decided that they had to bail Greece out, and the ECB and IMF and the European Commission took the private debt and basically from the private debt and put it onto their balance sheet. Now I have to give credit to George and Charles Gov because when everything converged and the boom came, it was Charles Gov. It was the father of Govco and George. You had sent me down to New York, and they had set up a European divergent fund, saying that wait a second, how can Greek interest rates and German interest rate be the same when you have all these huge government deficit problems in Greece and the Germans don't? Something has to give, and finally something did give. So they went out and shorted all the Greek bonds, and I think that chart shows how Greek yield spreads just boomed, widened, and there was a lot of money to be made. And so I remember that, George. I think you do too.
So basically,
So,
Greece blew up, right? And then
yep,
so it was a complete mess. Debt to GDP, all the stuff we're bitching and moaning about in the U.S. right now. The chickens came home to roost. But the big difference, Stav, was whereas we here in the U.S. have the reserve currency, we can borrow in dollars. The Greeks were not borrowing drachmas; they're borrowing in euros, and so it's their own currency, but they couldn't print because they didn't control
correct.
the euro. Okay, so they got saddled with all this huge debt. So the austerity chickens came home to roost. Okay, so place is a disaster. What happened at that point? What did Greece do? Like what were the options that they
So
had?
the Europeans decided to basically give them a bailout. Bondholders lost 50% of their money, and they accepted it because they said, well, otherwise it's going to default, so I'll take 50 cents on the dollar. All of a sudden, the austerity programs started coming in. They were harsh. People lost wages, pension funds were cut, and the economy collapsed by 20%. And unemployment rose to 27%. And for a little bit of time, the surplus came. And so Greece kind of came along, but it was painful. And people started to get really hurt, and especially older people who had saved, were waiting for their pension funds. So basically, the Europeans started to get pissed off because they said, "Why are we bailing these guys out?" There was even we got even to Saturday Night Live. We got a little blurb there about how Greeks don't pay taxes, and this is why should we bail them out, et cetera, et cetera. But so the which led to the second crisis in 2015. And that's where things got really sticky because the government that was voted in decided they weren't going to take any more bailout. They weren't going to take any more austerity. Why should they take the hit? And they started blaming the Europeans. The Europeans started to blame the Greeks. So the government balked, and all of a sudden you had capital controls. In other words, you woke up one day and the banks were closed. You couldn't take your money out.
Wait. You couldn't get your money out?
No, banks were closed. You couldn't wire money out of the country. And when they did open, they only allowed you to take $60 a day out of your ATM machine.
So stop. Living here in the U.S. for so many decades, people think, "Oh, keep the money in the bank, everything's okay." Like that's not the way it was in Greece at that time.
No.
Okay.
And I think it's going to happen in the US.
All right.
But anyway, that's another
All right.
story.
Okay.
We'll
I
get there.
can't wait to hear what he thinks about Bitcoin. Continue.
Dilly, all right, so, all right, stop. Keep on. So you couldn't get your money out. So then what happened? They cut spending in a big way. Like what did they do?
Yeah, so they decided to, they went back and forth. They, like today, they're arguing and they're all posturing for negotiations, and they finally agreed to a compromise. And they basically took the debt and kicked it out 30 years, and they sort of the Europeans gave the Greeks some leeway. They understood the harsh medicine wasn't going anywhere, and basically the Greeks decided to stay in the euro. They had to look. They got it. They had to go in a fork in the road, and like Yogi Berra said, you could take it. Of course, everybody knows. I don't know if everybody knows, but Yogi Berra lived in a roundabout, so whichever way he went, he still got to his house. Um,
So all
but
right.
that's
So
another.
stop. So what does austerity mean? Like
So basically, they decided to stay in the euro because a lot of the corporate contracts were in euros. It was going to be a mess to get out. So they took the medicine. Merkel gave them some money and some more extra leeway, and they kind of got their way out. I don't know if you saw a Jason Bourne movie where they're rioting in Greece. It was 216. That's why they were doing it because wages were cut. They were they started to tax things. I think I sent you something about swimming pools where there's supposed like 300 registered swimming pools, but there's really like 16,000, and nobody was paying their
Right.
swimming pool
So
fee.
basically, they use aerial footage to you had rich
Yeah,
people's pools who weren't paying any taxes, so they went around and started taking photos of properties who was rich enough to have a pool, and they started taxing people that way.
yeah.
So stop. You're saying there was a lot of pain, and people had to take
There was a lot of
a lot of
pain.
pain.
Even today, there's still pain. I mean, the market's up, but it's up from a very low base. Look, it's a smaller market. There's 10 million people in Greece. The second largest Greek city is in Australia. That a lot of people have left. There's a brain drain here. Population is declining, not increasing. The economy is about 240 billion. The market is 100 billion. Musk could buy the whole market and still have 150 billion in cash. So we're small. The banks are 50% of the index. In the US, it's 35%. So there's a lot of differences, but they are running a surplus and they are bringing down their deficit. Is it perfect? No. There's a lot of unemployment still, but it's come down a lot. But George, there's 30 million people come a year into Greece, and there's only 10 million people population. So, Greece is benefiting.
So stop. Let me ask you this. Let me ask you this. They took a lot of austerity. Real incomes were cut.
Yeah.
Are standards of living, have they recovered to what they were before this all happened?
No.
No. Okay.
No, it takes a very long time to get back to what you had, but it is improving. But they're taxing even new companies next year's earnings, and you haven't even had the earnings yet.
Wait. Wow. Wow.
So
Wow. 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 Wait. Explain that again. Hold on.
so you let's say you and I start a company here,
Oh.
right? Local company, and the Greeks will tax you for next year's profits.
How are they supposed to guess what next year's profits are?
They don't. You
They
just
just, they just give you
they,
an, they
they
just give you a
estimate.
number.
Well, you're a restaurant, and the others were make them around that. So this is what we're going to get you. They make
Right.
an estimate. I don't
So
know. They use J.P. Morgan estimate. I don't know. They
that's
just
correct. So they've become a lot tighter on collecting taxes.
yes. The new prime minister who came in a couple of years is a Stanford PhD, MBA, Harvard, went to Columbia, and he's digitalized the whole government. So they're using more digital assets to track your money. They don't take cash anymore. You can't bribe the officials like you used to in the past.
So
So
tax evasion, which has always been a national sport, not so easy anymore.
yeah, but they're finding ways to do it. It's still there's still some corruption. I won't say it in public, but
Yeah.
yes, I know what they're doing.
Sure.
They're just being more sophisticated. But in the past, George, it was egregious. I mean, they had scientists flying from Belgium to this island called Zakynthos, where all of a sudden there was this big concentration of blind people, and people going, "What's going on that island?" I mean, it's a beautiful
Yeah.
island, by the way. It's in the Ionian side, and they found that this doctor was issuing, blind certificates to truck drivers and butchers
What?
because so they
What?
could get. Yeah, it's a true story. So there are other stories where gardeners were getting paid by public hospitals that didn't have gardens, and you know or about the Greeks live forever on these blue zone villages, and the reality is they have died, but their families keep collecting the pension funds. They don't declare them.
Oh, so it's
So
just kind of like in the U.S. where you have all the craziness hour. Elon
yeah,
Musk
I
is,
mean, look, I can tell you the Greek story because I'm Greek. If anybody else says that, I get angry. But anyway, it's there. It was a sport, right? It was like typical emerging market, black economy. You don't disclose anything. When we were in the islands, we knew exactly when the tax collector was on the boat, which takes about 3 hours to get there. And all of a sudden, everybody's behaving for the 2 hours that the tax collector's there, and then when the guy leaves the island, they go back to their ways, right?
Jesus. All right. Okay, so Stav, let's talk a little bit. What is it like? So you moved back to Greece. So okay,
Yeah.
so that's all great, and we could talk for hours about stuff.
I think COVID changed everything,
All
George,
right, so
here.
okay, stop. We want to go to code. That's fine, but let's get up to where we are right now because I want people to understand, the difference living standards between here and Greece and what.
Yeah.
And it's great you're chronicling what Greeks had to go through to get to this place, and you can maybe weigh in on what you think the U.S. is looking at. So
Well, right now I was watching my Netflix TV here, and it cost me $12 to watch it. In the U.S., it cost me $20 to watch the same thing.
what? $12, not 20?
Yeah, I mean, okay, $8
Yeah,
a month
whatever,
is
whatever.
not.
Okay,
but you get the
Yeah.
point. For expats to come over, it's fantastic because you're getting still paid from abroad. There are a lot of digital nomads. The Greek government has put, or the excuse me, the Chinese have put fiber optics everywhere, so you have high speed internet, and people are staying longer. They're you have fantastic food. It's organic. You get farm to table food. It's cheap. Your wine's cheap, your food's cheap, your medical services are
Yeah, so
cheap. I
stop,
had
stop, hold on.
teeth
Stop,
cleaned
stop,
for fifty
stop, stop. Let's
dollars.
break this down. Let's break this down. So decent, because you and I drink wine. How much a decent bottle of wine over there?
You can get a good organic bottle of wine for like $6.
Okay, and you mentioned
How
how.
much would the same bottle cost here?
I don't know if you can get Greeks don't the grapes
Yeah,
are
no, no,
well it depends what
Dilly.
wait before Trump or
Yeah,
after
no, I mean,
but
Dilly. I'd say it's $30 here. Okay, Stavros, healthcare. What do you pay to go to the doctor?
So I went to I usually go to Mass General, which is a pretty good hospital. Get my annual cardiologist ultrasound, and who knows because the insurance pay, but it's your deductible is what in the states. And here I went, American trained doctor, same equipment. He did it right on the spot. It cost me $50.
$50.
Fifty
Okay, all right.
bucks.
Now let's say you want to go out to you don't live in Athens, and so it's probably more expensive in the city.
Well, I know I
No,
spent a lot of
stop,
time in
stop,
Athens
stop. Just let me
for
stop.
10.
Just hold on.
Yeah,
Let me get to the point. Don't.
yeah.
As I always kid you. Stop. Don't interrupt
I
me.
love that.
Don't
I
interrupt.
love this.
Oh, I
Don't.
always interrupt
Still,
you.
if you
After
would.
39 years, I get to
Yeah,
interrupt you.
Dilly.
So
If you
go
want
ahead.
to know something, he actually looks like me too. That's what's really freaky about it. So anyway, okay. Only difference is I'm Jewish. He's Greek, but it's the same. Say it's as Sebastian Maniscalco would
Oh,
say.
I thought the Jews were
No, no,
Greek.
but
Anyway,
as
go ahead.
Sebastian Maniscalco would say, Dilly, same corporation, different division.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
So anyway, so stop. So I was just, I was starting to explain how Athens is probably more expensive in the countryside, but give me an idea. So you want to go out to dinner, you don't want to kill it, decent, like, because what restaurant, I mean, you go out to dinner in Boston, let's say you're going to blow $150 for two people, all right? Similar dinner where you are, how much?
$30.
Oh
What?
my God.
$30.
And that's home cooked farm organic food.
That's basically what George spent on potatoes today.
Well, my friends, look, my buddy lives in Princeton, New Jersey. He gets on a train for 2 hours to get into Manhattan to get taxed by the city, the state, and the federal government. And you can do pretty much the same job over here, still, do what you're doing in the States. And you get a tax exemption for being over here for federal because you're outside of the country for X days. And you're not
Right,
taxed.
okay,
Plus, you're eating cheaper.
right.
Your house, you can get a 2 bedroom to 3 bedroom luxury apartment for 1,500 a
Whoa,
month.
whoa, 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 whoa. Hold on, stop, stop, stop. Dilly might move to Greece. 1,500 for
Yeah,
two or three.
I'm literally packing up right now.
1,500 for two or three bedroom. What in East Cupcake, Greece, or
Yeah, decent neighborhood, and they
wait?
are
Stop,
going up
stop,
because
stop, stop. This is in Athens or in East Cupcake, Greece?
yeah, in Athens,
What?
and if you go out to the villages, it's even cheaper.
So stop. Let
Yeah,
me ask you a question. Just stop for a second. All right. We'll go on and on. I want people to get into Q&A here, but so let me ask you the question a different way. Okay. What is it? Since you grew up basically entirely. You live
George, I never grew up, but
Okay,
go
but you
ahead.
live most of your life in the States. All right, fine. What do you?
Yes,
What are the? I don't know, two or three things like for folks in the room. You've been in a million spaces. You lived here in this country, whatever. What do you think
yeah,
people least understand?
I lost you.
Oh no.
Hello.
The feds took him out, Stop. He'll be right
At
back.
least I'll fill in the
Yeah,
blanks.
fill
I
in
mean,
the
first of all,
blanks.
not have I lived only in the states. I've really invested all over the world. I think the big thing for me is when I got back here and to spend time, local people are still stressed because even in the U.S., everything's going up. Their salaries are not. I think human capital is being devalued everywhere due to technology. But here, I was talking to my niece who's from New Jersey, and she's Greek American too. She goes, "At least here I can walk on the beach. It's beautiful out. I get great food, and it's not doesn't cost me a lot." But you go to the Jersey Shore and you're paying this. You're in Manhattan. I mean, to go out for dinner in Manhattan these days. I used to live in Manhattan in the '90s, and these kids today, you need to make a lot more money to survive,
Yeah, a ton
and
more money.
a
It's
ton
it's
more money. And yet what I'm doing here for my research, which is global research.
Hmm.
I'm indifferent. I work from as long as I have a high speed internet. It doesn't matter where you are with between Zoom and all that. In fact, I see people playing on the beach racquetball. They had their little things in their ear. They stop the game. They touch their ear. They are in the meeting. They go, yes, indeed, we should look into that. They press their ear again, and they go back to playing rackets while they're in a meeting.
Oh no, I just got the notification that the host is having connectivity issues. So Stav, if we get
We'll just keep
George,
going.
yeah, we'll just keep going and George will reboot
Yeah.
again.
So I think
We're
this
extra
is not
glitchy
just,
today.
yeah,
Sorry.
and this is not just Greece. This is Portugal, Spain in particular. They're having so many people show up. They're trying to slow people coming down, and they're not just coming for political reasons. They're coming because of lifestyle. It's just so much better. My son, who's just graduating now from Virginia Tech, he also has a European citizenship. He gets to go to Denmark for free for masters, and it's an English program. So you're looking at student debt in the United States, and we all know it's off the charts to send your kid to get educated. Here, it's a lot cheaper to get educated. So that sooner or later, that's these debt eats into you, and this is what the problem is. I think that's why George wanted to talk about Greece, is because sooner or later, the debt has to be paid, or most of the time it isn't paid, but they'll start printing, and that's why Bitcoin and gold keep going up. Because, and we had a gold fund back in 2002. It was at $280, and we actually had a model for it and predicted that it'd get to 1,000 to 2,000, only because the way you print your way out of these problems is exactly that. And gold just doesn't. That's why Bitcoin also is going up, and it will continue to go up as long as the deficits keep going. And the problem is as you have we never had in society so many older people. If you look at the composition of the population, it's past the threshold that is very difficult. And as older people, they tend to spend less, right? And because fertility rates are very low in Europe, U.S., and Japan, they're running out of people in Japan. In fact, I don't think there'll be anybody left in by 2020, 2060. You know, in fact, the old people are going to jail. Why? Because they're lonely and they go rob a 7-Eleven. They go for 2 years to jail. They have someone to talk to, be taken care of. When they come out, they go back and they rob the candy bar. In fact, crime in
So
Japan is 25% older
yeah.
people.
Stop. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah, good. Yeah, yeah,
I had no George for a
yeah,
while.
yeah.
Go
Yeah,
ahead.
no, no, no. This app is driving me nuts. Okay, so stop. So let's talk about, okay, so that's how Greece is a lot different. So is it really just the fact that the US, we've had the reserve currency, we're able to borrow in our own currency. That's why we've been able to get away with this for so long. If it was any other place, whether it's Greece or, you and I lived through the Swedish devaluation, that crisis, Argentina,
Yeah.
all these other places, because they can't borrow in their own currency, they got to pay the piper sooner rather than later. So is a big difference here just that we've been able to borrow in dollars, and now maybe that trick is coming to an end. Like the bond market's gonna vote against us. We're coming more like an emerging market.
George, ever since I've been in the industry, I've been hearing about the dollar falling apart. And I always look at Japan and what can happen there can happen here. For example, when we started in the industry, the Fed was not part of the capital market, or it was just setting rates. It was never buying bonds. It didn't have a balance sheet. So when I look at the Bank of Japan owning 40% of the stock market, has a balance sheet that's bigger than the Japanese economy, what's to say the Fed can't keep going and keeping this bull market going for another decade or two? That's my point to people. Is I think you're right. I just think it's calling the top is impossible, as you always say, and I agree with you. And they have more ammunition than you and I can even fathom.
So stop. All right, let me put it another way. Let me put it
Sorry,
another
that's
way.
my opinion. Yeah.
Yeah, no, 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 no. Let me ask the question a different way. So one of the narratives, and it's actually a fact, if you look at capital flows, is money starting to go home now. We've had 20, 25 trillion of money flow into the US in the last decade, pushing up the price of US, pushing up the dollar, pushing up price
Mhm.
of any US assets, Mag 7, the whole deal. You and I talk every day about that. How is the European or Greek stop? I don't know if this what's going on, but like when you're not
That's
talking,
all.
please.
Yeah.
It's just some noise in the background. I don't know what the heck it is. Stop. Please mute yourself when you're not talking because it's It's making it hard to hear you. All right, I muted you. So unmute yourself when you go to talk stuff. So how is the view from Europe? You can extract. You don't have to. You can recuse yourself from answering the question. But when you talk to fellow Greeks, other Europeans, how is their attitude towards the U.S. and our policies and the whole thing with the tariffs? Like, what are people thinking about the U.S. now? What really strikes you about how European attitudes possibly are changing towards the U.S. now, Stavros? Please unmute yourself.
Okay, yeah, so it's a great question. I think they were blindsided by these tariffs and then the military thing. I think they understand now that they're going to have to. I mean, the Germans, in particular, who have a very low debt to GDP, have realized that they need to get going. So what they're doing is they're biding time. And they're basically reaching out to the Chinese. I mean, in Greece already, the Chinese own 67% of the port. So if you come to Greece,
What? Wait, whoa. How did that happen? Was that recent? What the Greeks just sold the assets to the Chinese? Like, how did that come about?
yeah, so the Chinese have as okay, so in the US, we've got I don't know 100 200 bases outside of the US. Well, the Chinese have 100 200 ports outside of China. They're buying up all the ports here and they're building up a logistic chains for their trade. So they
Right.
own 60 they put $400 million into the port of Piraeus. They own 67% of that. They own 28% of the northern port of Salonika. They put a bunch of money there. So on one hand, we have that. Then we have three bases, the U.S. bases. So we're kind of caught in the middle. Two of the bases are run by NATO. One is run by the U.S. Navy in Crete. And so basically, I think that the Europeans have basically have a Trump clock. It's 1,328 days, and he's out. So they're taking a longer term view that sooner or later the American people will, come to their senses. And meanwhile, they just have to wait it out and just sort of, do it quietly. And meanwhile, they need little time to get their military together.
So,
There's
European attitudes have definitely changed vis-a-vis the U.S.
Yeah, and they also changed the students too. They're a little worrying about sending their kids to American universities, and if the kid gets drunk, writes a stupid article, he may have the helicopters come down and take him away or her away.
Right.
Like they did in Tufts, and when that that kind of. So why should I send my kid to the United States? If this is
And stop. Let me ask you something. Let's assume miraculously we get some trade relief agreements or whatever. Let's just let me just let's just stipulate that, okay? That someone we wave a magic wand 3 months from now, whatever, 6 months from now. I think it's going to happen, but the trade thing kind of goes away. The tariff thing gets settled. Has enough confidence in the U.S. been shaken, and we still got 3.5+ years to go with Trump that kind of it's like trust irrevocably lost. It's sort of like if your business partner screws you on something, or an important vendor screws you on something, you may continue to do business with them. You hold them further askance. You won't get so close to them. But once you lose trust in somebody, like you can't go back again. So is this like a passing thing, or do you think no, this is really far more serious change in attitude the Europeans have towards the U.S. than has ever taken place before?
based on my conversations, they're distinguishing between Trump and America.
Okay.
But they understand going forward that the Americans have a debt problem and that they can't keep financing the world as it was after World War II.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not going to sit there and their issue is Russia. In Greece, it's Turkey.
Mm-hmm.
But they're everybody has an issue. We say in Greek, everybody has their own pain and their own
Right.
problems. But yes. So short term, tactically, there's the European trade will continue, but then thereafter, George, the population trends in Europe aren't that great. The fertility rates are low. All of a sudden, the immigration issue is a problem in France and in Spain and Sweden and other places, and they want them out. And so, at the end of the day, capital will always flow to where it's treated best. And
Right.
and still America offers that, but yeah, he definitely has disrupted the process, and all eyes are on the debt. Can they do something? People aren't stupid. They're going to look at that. We're all looking at the numbers to see is are they actually reducing it? But
Right.
more importantly, are they reducing the real issues that nobody's talking about, which is healthcare, right? And you can get healthcare here for a fraction of the cost and still get decent care.
Right. Well, that's because, yeah, but Cyrus, to be fair, that's because, I mean, Europe generally, Greek in particular, you have higher levels of taxation than you have here in the States. So, I mean, as I remember, roughly speaking, I think, we have a spending problem here, not so much a revenue problem. I think
Yeah,
here, revenues run around 18% of GDP. Right now, we're running 6%, 7% of GDP deficit. So, we're spending like 24, 25%. But I remember, this doesn't include state revenues, obviously, but I remember when we
yeah,
do all the comparisons, U.S. versus Europe. Europe, people here say, "Oh, it's great. You get all this, free that."
yeah. No,
But
definitely
but
not
you're
a
paying
tariff.
but you're
Yeah,
paying for it in the form of taxes. I mean, so
correct.
that's so there's that. Okay. And by the way,
So
one other question, I do want to get the audience into this, but so this whole idea of more. This is maybe from what I've read, and I've come to believe. So this is what's laying the groundwork for Europe stepping up its spending, realizing that the U.S. is not going to defend them anymore. They got to start spending money for their own. So you have the release of the debt break and blah blah blah. So big fiscal expansion in Europe, which in turn has led European interest rates to go up significantly. European banks are doing really well on the back of this as well. But basically, looking forward, the next 10 years are going to look very different, looking as opposed to the last 10 years, where Europe is going to be in a much bigger fiscal expansion than was previously the case. Is that right, Steph?
correct, absolutely. They got the memo. It just they didn't expect it so quick, and now they're, like I said, they're biding their time, and they will use the money. It's still a question whether they have the can they get along to do it, right? So Trump has helped get them to agree on things, but typically Europeans don't agree on everything. So we'll see if they
Sure.
can they
Okay.
can put it together, but they will spend this money and they will spend it on their own jobs and their own
Got
technology,
it.
their own defense.
Got it. All right. Hey, Dilly, who's up next?
Uh, UKR, we have a hand up.
Hello, George. Hello, Dilly.
Hey.
Thank you for holding these spaces. So I have a question for Stav. I'm from Europe. I'm from Sweden. So Stav, I have a question related to the public debt in Greece and how it is, let's say, how, I mean, you guys are, I think you guys are better off than Spain and Portugal, right? Am I correct? And
Much
what
better than
is,
Italy and
yeah,
yeah, Spain. I think we're a little bit but they're different economies. But go ahead. Yep, yep.
yeah. And what are the latest reforms in Greece related to labor reforms and things like that? Thank you.
Yeah. So in Greece, the shadow economy is still an issue. Trying to get people to pay taxes. They're starting to audit people. They're trying to figure out where the money is. They're still looking for money. But the problem is, I don't think you can tax your way to prosperity. You have to create, jobs, growth, opportunity. And I do think the tourism is underpinning that, and they're doing a $2 billion expansion in the airport. The tourist season is expanding into the fall. People are staying longer. We're having a lot more people come and buy places, and I know a friend of mine bought from England came to buy in Crete, and they're staying, and they're so and you have a population problem. There's not enough people coming through, so you're having some labor shortages similar to the States. So but believe me, when you have a decelerating population around the world, democracies don't do well generally as a predictive, and we're still in early stages. This Greece will be one of the fastest aging populations in Europe. I think already we're like 8 or 9 years on average older than the U.S. The U.S. has it too, but in Greece, it's really a shortage of labor. My brother-in-law, who runs these stores, he can't find help. It's hard to find people to work at these restaurants. So I think that's a common problem throughout all these areas, and remains to be seen how we're going to deal with it and how we're going to handle all this tourism that's coming our way. I don't know if I answered your question, but
Yeah, it did, Stav. Yeah, thank you very much.
it's a common problem everywhere, I think.
Yeah, it is. I mean, we in Sweden we have almost the same problem. Actually, I mean, our population, Greece and Sweden, is still almost the same. I think we are going to surpass Greece. No
Yeah.
one talks about that much, but demographic is an issue. Yeah,
Yeah,
correct.
yeah. UKR, one question I want to ask you, because I know it's a question on a statement.
Yeah.
Sweden has made the headlines in a big way the last couple of years because there's been a lot of problems with immigration.
Mm.
And I know Sweden's a very homogeneous population, and it's been a very difficult problem integrating the immigrants and huge crime wave, et cetera, et cetera. So, two questions. One, could you talk about the immigration situation in Sweden? And then once you're done with that, Stavros, if you could talk about what's going on with the immigration in Greece. So, UKR, you go first, please.
Yeah, the immigrant. I mean, Sweden has had a long time issue with when it comes to integration of the migrants towards the working sector, right? It has been a very long period since the 90s, but it has been very difficult to talk about it in the media because it is very easy to get branded as, you are towards immigration and things like that, right? But I think the debate actually changed somewhere in 2015 that that politicians actually start to talk about it very openly, that we have an issue with the migration and we have to do something about it. It's both migration and crime, maybe related to migration. And you see stories in the media like it's shootings and gang criminality, and yeah, it's a big issue over here.
Isn't the pendulum, the public opinion, as I've read it, but I could be misinformed. That's why I'm asking a question, not making a statement. But from what I've been able to read, it seems like the public opinion is swinging back from the left, much more towards the right, because people are pissed off with the crime and the problems with integration of the migrants. Is that correct or not?
Yeah, that is correct. And that pendulum actually shifted in 2015, right? We have a party in Sweden called the Swedish name is Sverigedemokraterna. Swedish Democrats is almost like it's more, I don't know how to say, the populist movement, right? Who wants to cut down migration and things like that. So they have popularity votes of 18% right now. So the recent government is liberal conservative, so they have the support backing of the Swedish Democrats. So yeah,
Right.
that's
And so can immigrants still come in as easily as before, or have they tightened up the borders now?
the migration. Let's say the migration pressure towards Sweden has gone down a lot. I think we are actually down to figures that was beginning of the year 2000s, right? So there are not many migration that is coming to Sweden right now, even if the figures are still high, right? And the law has cut down a lot, has had an effect on migration also towards Scandinavia. But what we see now is more migration related to work related migration. It can be towards engineering or IT services and things like that. So the biggest, I would say, work migration we see right now, it is mostly people from Asia. It can be India or China. Yeah.
Thanks. Stavros, could you talk about the immigration situation, please?
Yeah, well, it's we had a big influx during the Olympics to back in 2004, and then they had the crisis, and a lot of people left because there were no jobs, and so we had that. Then we had all the Syrians come through Turkey. They're trying to find a home in Europe. the European policy was very bad because they basically send you back to where you came into Europe, and it's your problem. So if they all come through Greece, they all get sent back to Greece, and we have to put them back. Uh, Syria has changed. There is some talk about people wanting to go back to Syria. It's not a little bit early, so they may reverse. But yeah, the immigrants they try to get, and they have these programs. I don't know if you're familiar, George, with these Greek golden visa programs that other countries have done. They give you a 5-year residence if you invest 250,000 euros in a real estate in Greece. They'll give you 5 years of permit, and you can travel among all the Sargent countries, which is basically all of Europe, and you can stay as long as you want. So Tom Hanks got one of those, among others. So that kind of tourism people want. You bring money to it, but the other kind that you're talking about is a problem, and coming through the Turkish border or the islands, and these guys are taking risks to see Greece as a gateway to the rest of Europe. So it's still happening, but isn't as bad because things have quieted down in the Middle East, at least the part that was, the
Got
people
it.
who were
Okay.
escaping.
Dilly, who's up? Thanks, Dilly. Who's up next?
We have Memetic, and I also think KP had his hand up. I think
Yeah, Dilly, if you could.
KP was first, and then we'll go to Memetic.
Yeah, Dilly, if you could please organize the speakers, I'd appreciate
Oh yeah,
it. Thank
no
you.
problem.
He can go first, Dilly. It's no worries. I had a 2-part question, so in case he only had one.
Well, cool. I'm happy to jump up, guys. I just wanted to add to what Stav said, just real briefly, right? I love the title of the space. I think Greece is a huge lesson, particularly if we go back about a decade ago when the UK was still part of the European Union and Greece effectively went bankrupt, right? I totally agree with what you said, Stav, that you can't tax your way to prosperity. But with Greece, back when this happened, they were talking about sovereignty, right? And they had to get bailed out. And it just further amplifies what you said, that Western democracies don't do austerity. Like, you cannot tax your way out of this because
Correct.
people aren't going to vote for that. So just wanted to throw that in there.
100%. That's the problem. There's a duration problem in Washington. Your election cycle is 4 years, and every 2 years you got the midterms. And if you're putting policies that require, I mean, look at Africa, for example. We never invested in Africa because they don't have enough power to run their factories. Why? Because to get power, you need to make 10, 20, 30-year investments. But the governments change every couple of years with coups and whatnot. Nobody's going to willing to take that 10, 20, 30-year view. The structural issues that we are faced now require long-term thinking. Unfortunately, we have a proximity bias. We're always trying to put out the latest fire, and you want to get elected. So you can't. That's why democracies and slow growth and aging populations don't mix. And it usually ends up poorly and very nationalistic because you do the blame game. So this is the problem, and this is why I think trade and globalization, the stuff that George and I benefited from investing all over the world and seeing all these countries open up for the first time. Now we're in reverse. We're back to kind of regionalization. And that usually is more expensive, and it doesn't really make you feel warm and fuzzy beyond this trade of we're going to readjust our portfolios because we don't want too much U.S. exposure. My question is, what happens after that? Like, where's the the growth coming in? And I don't see it. That's the problem. So I don't know if I kind of went off on tangent, but yes.
Let's go to KP with your 2-part question.
Thank you, Dilly, and good seeing you, George. Stavros, or if I mispronounce the last name, I'll just say Stav. Your question that I would have first part, with the growing trade, right, between Greece and other countries outside the European Union, right? What are your thoughts on that, especially with Asia? Second question, with what's going on with the, if you want to call it repolarization or the changes pertaining to the West and Europe, what are your thoughts going forward when it comes to both questions, industry group wise, or what would you be kind of looking out for in a general sense?
Well, in Europe, they have tariffs between the countries, so it's tough to trade within Europe. Europe is definitely pivoting and entertaining the Chinese at this point. They weren't before. The Chinese were basically locked out of the European markets, but now with Trump, doing what he did, they're much more open-minded to the Chinese. And trading, and in particular, they're very protectionist regarding their automobiles and electric vehicles. So the Chinese are actually benefiting from all this because they're coming across as the nice guys, which is quite incredible. But so I think you'll see more and more trade with China, and so if that was part. What was the second part of the question? Sorry.
With kind of like the repolarization, right, between the West, if you want to call it more North America and Europe, right, and then on both questions, industry-wise, you did mention obviously the Chinese with auto, right, in that sector. But would you say defense sector or the industrial sector as well? And then I was mentioning with all of the rest of the EU, right,
Yeah.
and in that
So
relationship.
there's a long-term chart that Bank of America does that everyone loves to retweet, but I have it somewhere. Give it to George. If you invested in the defense sector, you outperformed everything. I think you will continue to do that. Defense is going to go up, not down, as more and more people are, arming themselves.
And thank
So
you.
that's a no-brainer.
I have a question about like what are your thoughts on Bitcoin with seeing the banks do what they did in Greece? Do you have any strong opinions about Bitcoin?
Yeah, I mean, I'm the older guy, so I think Bitcoin is sort of like gold for me. It's they're it's no it's we're going definitely going to go digital. My concern with Bitcoin is that, like what happened in 1934 with Roosevelt, they'll just pass a law and change the rules on you overnight, and all of a sudden it's going to be regulated. So, and they're gonna want to they're gonna outlaw it if they don't like it. The governments are gonna come after your money sooner or later. They need it. Where else are they gonna get it? Right? They got deficits. They need to fund it. So if they see that they can't control the Bitcoin or they can't control digital assets, they'll pass laws to regulate it, and you don't want to go against that. So what Roosevelt did in 1934, he basically made gold illegal, I think, and then he devalued it or he revalued it and
Right.
made a lot of money off people. So my pro, or if you read the Jekyll Island, where the Federal Reserve was set up as basically to keep the banks under a cartel, so to speak, to regulate them. So that's what governments do. Once they see that there's money in it, they'll start regulating it, and they're a little slow in the uptake, but they seem to be getting it up there, getting there. But yeah, it's definitely I think still a buy. If I have the crypto research report, and it's been one of the best reports I ever produced. But it's gold and crypto are kind of like the same. Bitcoin in particular will continue to benefit until I see that the governments actually are going to get their debt problem taken care of. I don't think tariffs are going to solve it. They're not really addressing the key problems that the Greeks had to address that really caused a lot of pain. And unfortunately, the politicians don't want to give a lot of pain to people
So
because
Stavros,
the
so
point
Star,
that they don't get elected.
so Stavros, what do you? So just we'll get to you 1 second, Alex. Stavros, so when you sitting in Greece, as an American, whatever, you look at the U.S. What do you think is going to happen here? I mean, we're between a rock and a hard place. Do you think like the window is closing? Like we're gonna if things are gonna come to a head sooner rather than later? Like from the outside looking in, or as you always say, you're a guy in the booth looking down at the playing field. How do you seeing this playing out in the U.S. sitting in Greece?
The U.S. I think people are just going to wait it out, and they also know he's bluffing, and he's not going to. He always backs off. He starts high and he ends up low. And basically, now that they understand it. They got little. People adjust. George, look, here's the difference. When you're in a global economy or you're in a village where I grew up, Everybody knows everybody, right? So you might get one on, you may want to get one on someone, but the next time you come to the table, they're ready and they're prepared. That's the difference between a transactional president and being a diplomat, so to speak. When you can do a deal, everybody feels they got something. That's sustainable. When you're just trying to, tell people you get this way or the highway, you might get it through the first time,
Right.
but you're not going to get it through
Okay.
the second time. Does that
Okay.
make
So Stavros, looking beyond that. Okay, I'm thinking now
Yeah.
more about the fiscal situation and the huge deficit, and oh my God, if we go into recession, could the deficit get even bigger? Like, so far we've been able to finance these deficits. Like, do you think
Yeah.
we're running out of? Do you think we're kind of running out of room on
No.
this now?
No.
What do you think is happening?
The Fed will balance sheet is going to grow. I mean, when I was asked about QE1, and Richard Koo, and
Sure.
it's the same. It's the same roadmap, George. It's the Fed will just find different ways to
So
monetize.
they'll just print more money and
Yeah, if the Fed's
stores.
what 20% of the balance sheet to the G, I think the Fed's balance sheet will get to close to 100% of the U.S. economy.
So if you think so, stores of value, things like gold or people want Bitcoin, whatever stuff like that, should still do okay. No.
Michael Howell is absolutely right.
Yep. Okay. All right. Let's go to Alex. Alex, please unmute yourself.
Hey, what's up, guys? So, Stav, you were talking about pain, right? In a way, as things have gotten more expensive here in the States, people are, finding their way to Greece. Anecdotally, I have 4 different friends that are all moving within this year, one to Portugal, one to Spain, one to Switzerland. Basically, everybody is going to Europe.
That's great. You have places to visit.
Well, and also because where technology is working
Yeah.
remotely, they're able to kind of, you know, work remotely there. But it seems like we are, in a way, exporting our pain, right? The more we're getting squeezed here, people are leaving the US to go work someplace else where you can afford a
Hmm.
lot more of a lifestyle than you can afford here. But in a way, we are exporting that pain to the locals, right? We were talking about the
Correct.
experience of the Greeks. My family is just up north in Macedonia, and it's the same thing. Inflation is a lot higher up there. It's a
Yeah.
smaller economy, can't sustain itself. So I'm curious about your opinion with, like the current policy. Okay, we're raising tariff, we're basically taxing. It's a different kind of pain, right? But like the Main Street is still getting squeezed and taxed. How does that reflect? Like if we,
Okay.
let's say
So
we
that.
stick with the tariffs and we stick with this policies, like how does that, what does the, like that moving
Yeah.
wave look like?
So there's two kinds of pains, right? There's the pain that Greeks went under, which is when you take away something from someone, it's very painful and they riot. Or you can inflate your way out. In other words, I'll keep your salary the same, except your packages is shrinkflation, right? And I know this because I know some of my my friend who has the Greek yogurt in the U.S. He said I shrunk my package when my milk costs went up. So it's if you inflate your way out, right? You don't see it as much. So that's the difference. In the US, we're going to inflate, you're going to, you won't see it. It'll be very subtle. And prices just go up and they creep up, and it's like the frog in the boiling water. It dies over time because it doesn't jump out. But when you go out and you cut in Cyprus, they took 10% of your bank account as a tax overnight. That's taking something away from you. That's loss. Losing money in the stock market is much more painful than getting paid the same amount of money, but you just can afford less things. Does that make sense?
So
So
you,
go ahead.
so Star Wars, you're basically saying we're going to have sort of money illusion here. We're just going to
Correct.
we're going to devalue money. So it'll be money illusion is what you're saying.
And that's why Bitcoin and gold go up, because they have to do it this way. George, there's no other way of doing it.
Right. Right. Alex, I interrupted. You have another question?
Well, the other thing is that we measure productivity in terms of population growth, right? But now we have, converging technologies that, we speculate that it might, automation, robotics, AI might increase our productivity gains exponentially. So I'm trying to reconcile all of that and would love your opinion. Like, can that
Sure.
basically be our, wild card that
So
saves us all?
I tell in speeches there's three ways to make money. First one is 50%, the other one's 35, and the rest is the 15. The 50% is where family you were born into. So that's random. I can't help you there. If you were born into, Hiroshima or, in 1943 in a rich family, you're probably not going to see, a lot of years ahead. So it depends where you were born. So that let's put that one aside. Then as I tell people, it's who you marry, right? That's why all these movies are about marriage. It's like marrying your station and all that. And the last is the most important. That's what my father used to say. It's the social mobility. And U.S. has the best social mobility still. If you're 7 feet tall and can put a ball in a hole, you're going to get paid a lot of money. If you can kick a soccer ball into the net, you're going to get paid. If you can set up a company and own it, you can make a lot of money. In countries where the mobility is not so good, the percentage of being able to make wealth is so low that that's why people get in a boat and go to another country, because there's more opportunity. So as long as the U.S. is still although it's shrinking, and I'll tell you why it's shrinking, is the place that people will still come to the States. The reason it's shrinking is that the wealth being created has no cost to scale. In other words, in the old days, if you could make a factory, you could have number two, like an accounting firm. It was the laws of diminishing return. You always had a second, a third, a fourth. In technology, there is no second or third or fourth, because the marginal cost to reproduce it is zero. So if Google does something good, they could take the whole market, because they doesn't, it's either 8 billion or one, it's the same cost for them. So who owns Google? Very few people. So the wealth being created only goes to the few, not to the many. So that leaves everybody out of the picture. So that's why it's hard to create wealth when only a few people own it. And then who owns the stocks? Very few people. So the stock market does not represent the economy. In fact, I think this S&P is completely uninvestable. Why? Because as a professional money manager, I have, by the SEC, diversified portfolio. I can't own more than 20, 25% in a sector, yet this market is 40% or whatever it is tech. So what am I going to own? 50% tech? Are we going to own 60% in six stocks? You can't. You can't. So the stock market doesn't really reflect the economy. And the economy is such that human capital is being devalued consistently. And it's much cheaper for me to go and get a robot. I can discount it. I get depreciation. A human will take my know-how, walk across the street, and open up their own store. It's very and they get sick and they want vacations. They're terrible people. I'm joking. So human capital is being devalued. So how the hell are you going to make any money? That's what I tell my children. Back in the 50s and 60s, where my parents came to America, you could still make money being in middle class. Today, I don't see how you're going to make money working for Walmart and being able to pay for what's becoming more and more expensive, and a country that's borrowing more and more and more and more in the future. So I'm not a guy they invite to parties very much, unfortunately. Sorry, George, but
Yeah.
it's I see this and I go, how the hell are these kids gonna make money, real money, and have a good life? I don't know how it's going to be. And I look, I sat next to David Stockman, which was Ronald Reagan's. And George, you were there. You were at that lunch.
Yeah, it was former head of OMB under Reagan, budget director.
Yeah, and I asked him point blank, just like Dilly's asking about Bitcoin. I asked him about gold, because I said, "Do you think there'll be capital controls in America?" And he goes, "Yes, there will be, because the Democrats spend and the Republicans cut, and they keep alternating, and the debts keep going higher and higher and higher and higher, and sooner or later you will hit that. The question is when. I think it's going to be a decade or so more. So which means it will have nice, inflation, and you have to have, and when
Right.
I have a group of friends who are preppers, we call them the prepper class, right? And they're preparing for all this stuff. They're preparing their gold, and they're preparing their Bitcoin, and their protection, and their farmland, and they're worried, because let's say the supply chain stops in 2 weeks in America, you won't have food on the shelf. What are you going to do then, right? It's so anyway. And after that, I'm going down a
So
tangent here.
right. So by the way, we'll do a little bit of a
Sorry,
unveil
yeah.
here. No. So if you Stavros, you've heard to me, you're really on a roll, Tom. Hats off to you. So something is happening on June 5th. Something is happening on June 5th, and I've said that a couple times. Save the date. I've been kind of Haven't said a whole lot about what's going
Cryptic.
down, but June 5th, if you want to hear more from Stavros, you'll be able to. There will be a number of people that you've all heard in these spaces. You'll have a chance to hear them all speak in one day, June 5th. And the names are not important right now. There'll be an official announcement. I've been slow getting this out, but um, people in the room say, who would you want to hear talk of all the speakers we've had? You're going to hear a lot. You'll be able to hear a lot of them all in one day on June 5th. So, yeah, so Stavros will be under Vestmo. He'll be speaking as well. So this space has been mostly about Greece, but obviously Stavros brings his financial perspective and global investment expertise to bear on it, and talk about not just from a human perspective, from a financial perspective. So again, June 5. Dilly, who is up on stage and has had a chance to ask a question? I really have lost track. Russ, did you have a question?
No, definitely. Stavros, thank you so much. My grandparents are from Greece.
Oh,
Oh,
good.
well, great grandparents, sorry. Grandparents came as children, still have a chest, a trunk that they came over in. Pappas is the last name. So, anyway, I love Greece. I think it's amazing. But I have a question really. Ca Is there a way you can extrapolate Greece at all with what you see in Japan? Um, I know that's a bit of an odd question, but I'm trying to think through like what Greece has done recently. What is there any correlation of anything that you see with Japan and Greece because of all your experience?
Yeah, so when I went to Japan, I realized there's so much like Greeks in the sense that they think everybody else is an idiot. Sorry to say it this way. They have 2,000-year histories. In Japan, for example, it was only, well, Admiral Perry that whirled in that they opened up. Up until then, they've never been open, right? It's one of the few languages that is spoken exactly the same it was 2,000 years ago. So on one hand, they have both have Greeks and Japanese have the island mentality. Greece is a peninsula surrounded by water. The difference is the Greeks we were under Ottoman rule for 400 years. So Greeks need a lot of therapy after that as a culture. We're much more open. It's much more international. It's much more accepting as people are coming in. In Japan, they still have, and what I know is they still don't like foreigners coming in. And that's why they're building robots. If you go to their old homes, they're basically rather have a robot than have foreigners come into to the island and allow migration in that regard. So the difference is the similarities are, old cultures, very surrounded by water. They have a lot of history. But the Greeks, it's look, the area of Greece and this whole it was never really a country per se. It was all Ottomans, Habsburgs. It was empires, and this whole notion of countries started about a couple hundred years ago, and everybody's trying to get their country together. Greece started in 1821, basically. I got my years right, and it's already been engulfed into the European common market. So I do see a big difference is that Greece is much more open, and I think they'll continue to get more travelers. I mean, think of it: 30,000 people visiting a country that only has 10,000. I
You
mean,
mean
10 million.
30 million? Yeah, yeah.
But Japan is still very, xenophobic. I mean, there are Koreans there that have been there 5 generations, and they still see them as Koreans. So it's that's the difference, and the Japanese are just not having enough kids. That's the problem. So I think they have a big problem going forward. I mean, in 2050, I won't be around, but it's all demographic predicted, and demographics have very strong predictive powers over the long run. The short term doesn't. We don't worry. You don't have to worry about it. It has no value. But in the long run, especially if you look at the age cohorts, and actually, George, you sent me to a demographer back in the day, and basically it's the 40 and the 50-year-olds make the most amount of money, and as they get less and less and less, the spending power for the domestic economy gets less and less. And the Japanese are way past that. They're basically they're on a downhill. They're not making
Yeah,
enough.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Stop. Japanese population has been going down for the last 2 or 3 years, isn't
Yeah, and
it? Yeah.
it's gonna go to
Yep.
zero, George. You need
Well,
inflation.
I know, but
You
it's
need at least two kids to populate. We predicted China with the one child policy was going to bite them in the you know what, and it did. And China has a big problem. They're just like 10, 15 years behind
yeah,
the
but
Japanese.
stop. Aren't reproduction rates? I mean, collapsing everywhere all across. We know what
100%.
we know in Europe. Like I know, like Italy has been a disaster, but it's happening now in the U.S. Happening everywhere
Yeah,
in this sort of
George.
post-COVID environment.
This screws up all the quant guys. I'll tell you why. Because
Why?
the kryptonite to quant is novelty. It's never happened before, so you can't model something that's
Oh,
never.
you mean like housing prices never go down?
Yeah,
2008? Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
Right.
So it's never happened before, and right now humanity has never had aging population. Like, look at all the Social Security and Medicare. I mean, mostly Social Security. It was built in the 30s, and it was you're supposed to retire at 65, right? But in the
Mhm.
30s, the life expectancy was 59, right? So now we're we haven't changed anything. So now we live till 80, 85, and how's that going to work? You know, my parents died. They wanted
Great.
home care. You know, it's expensive to
Yep.
have
Yep.
home
Yep.
care. Now you have $90 trillion going from one group to another in America. And how's that going to happen? In Massachusetts, they set up a fiduciary court just to handle this because all these families and hybrid families are going to they're going to be ripping each other apart for that money. Anyway, that's a off the that's another. That's nothing to do with Greece, but it's I see this happen. You know, actually, okay, I can say this. In the Greek family, had the biggest, the Mullis family in Massachusetts with the market basket. It's one of the biggest lawsuits for exactly this, passing on from one generation to the next.
Yep.
So in the U.S. is not has that problem as well, and who's going to manage that? And by the way, they're not going to use wealth advisors. They're going to want apps and other things to manage their money. Anyway, that's another story.
Stop. A complete non sequitur. As long as you're here, I plead ignorance. But population of Greece is what, 10 million or something like that? You said.
Yeah, 10
Okay.
million in
Okay.
Greece and about 7 or 8 outside.
Okay. Are there many? How should I put this? Different ethnic groups in Greece, or part B, if you go to different parts of the country, let me just make one of those speech and a question things. Or you go to different parts of the country, it's very different. Like, if you're in Italy, the South is very different from the North. If you're in the States, Alabama doesn't look like Massachusetts. If you're in the US, we got Hispanics, Asians, Jews, Greeks, whatever. Is Greece sort of homogeneous or very heterogeneous?
Now, Greece is, we love other people. We just got rid of everybody. No, I'm kidding. We,
What?
exactly. Uh, so, So 10% of the population is Albanian, but they've converted to being Greek. So in other words, let's say the person who takes care of my house on the island is as a Greek name, but when you put the money in his bank account, he's got an Albanian name. So they've assimilated. Now Albania is hot. I mean, the Trumps are investing there. They just bought an island with Saudi money, and they're turning it into a five-star resort. So Albania is opening up. But yeah, 10% is Albanian. Greeks are coming less and less, and a lot of people, have come down now that Bulgaria and Romania are open borders, right? Because now Sargent and they got into the EU. There's less and less Greeks in Greece, and you'll see more and more foreigners. Of course, the best basketball player in Greece is from Nigeria.
Wow. Well, yeah, yeah. So wait, hold on. Can you explain? Yeah, I know. So it's him and his brother. I can never pronounce his name. So the guy in the bunks, Anatop, whatever his name is. Okay. So like, what is his deal? Like, he's Greek, but by way of Nigeria. Like, can you explain that, please?
So his parents came to Greece when I think he was born here, and they grew up, and he was selling like sunglasses, and they were so poor that they had to, basically share sneakers to play when they got substituted. And then he got discovered by an Greek American from Chicago agent, and the rest is history. But yeah, and he's actually a very nice guy. He went back to his neighborhood, and the guy that gave him food, because they were illegal aliens. They couldn't work and get pension or anything, and they had to go from one house to another so they wouldn't get deported. And then the guy that helped him out, he gave him his jersey from the All-Star game. So really good
Wow.
guy. Yeah,
Wow.
he's a really, and they
Let me
love him.
let me ask you one other bizarre
Now
question.
he's Greek, by the way. They made him Greek. So
Yes, yeah, I already agree. So let me ask you another ignorant question. So many European countries, and I know you talk about this country thing is a relatively new phenomenon. I mean, Germany was a hodgepodge, Italy was a hodgepodge. I mean, they all got assembled at various times. Okay, but some of these places, they all have like colonies. Like the Dutch had colonies all over the place. The French, in Africa, the Germans, whatever. Was
Hmm.
Greece too small to ever? Did they ever have any colonies anywhere or no?
George, we haven't done anything for 2,000 years. I mean,
What
we
are you
survived.
doing? Too busy doing geometry and stuff? Pythagorean
No,
theorem? Like, what's going on?
Alexander the Great, man. We got communities still in Afghanistan that speak Greek from Alexander the
What?
Great. Yeah, this guy, basically took over everything. He was all over Africa, and since then, we haven't really done a lot. So
So wait,
we're
did you guys basically peak with Aristotle or something? Is that it? I
pretty
mean,
much, yeah, I think so. Then the Romans came and they basically took our technology and they took it to the next level. And then since then, we had, I told you, 400 years of Ottoman rule. We didn't have a chance.
so let me ask you a totally different question. This is like trivia time. So anyone has a question, raise their hand. So I know a regular close Italian friend of mine, and I don't know if there's a read across, but a very close Italian friend of mine would tell me when he was a young man growing up and he wanted to pursue opportunity, given how insular Italy was, and it's an old boys network, he was told by his parents to go to London to pursue a real entrepreneurial thing. And you could say, well, gee, the UK compared to the US is nothing, but still, Italy was such an old boys club. It's like the upward mobility was somewhat limited. So my question to you now is, in
Yeah.
Greece, if you're a young enterprising individual, is there plenty of opportunity, or is it still kind of the same thing? Though you mentioned brain drain earlier on in the conversation. Do the best and the brightest of the young want and the youngest, want to pursue opportunity elsewhere, or or they
Yeah.
stay in Greece? So we'll speak to that, please.
Yeah, so this particular prime minister has opened up a lot for that. It's still early days because obviously, Harvard MBA, Stanford PhD. He's changed the laws for university research to be able to monetize and go public with their inventions. Before it wasn't the case. He's trying to set up little enclaves of venture capital. My friends at the Hellenic MIT network in Boston have done a lot for Greek. So there are green sprouts of Greek venture capital here, and you're starting to see more and more. And obviously, it's a great place to work, but it's still small potatoes. I mean, you need to compete on a global basis. It's still Silicon Valley, it's Tel Aviv, it's the usual suspects. But there are more and more of this coming AI and all that. I mean, a lot of the Greeks left. They went to MIT. They went to one of the biggest companies in New England. Fisher Scientific was actually thermoelectric, and that was formed by Mr. Hatzopoulos, which we know in Boston. He's Greek. He was a professor at MIT, and my dad left also Greece for the social mobility because he could teach at BC. Well, in the university here, it's very political. Only 20. They only accept 20%, and even if you apply and you get into you want to go politics, they may send you to law school, right? You don't get to choose like in the U.S. So it's a very rigid system, and that's why you have to leave, if that makes any sense.
Right. And,
But
and by the way, how are the schools? I mean, are private schools a thing in Greece or not so much? The public schools, do they have a tracking thing where, like, it's like, stop, going back
like
to the
this,
Boston
the
days.
gentleman, I don't know if he's still on, but he went to the ACS, which is the American Community School, and that's
Uh-huh.
very good. But that's private; you have to pay for it.
Right.
The public schools are, they're not that great.
And what about the universities? Are they public or are they private ones too?
The universities are public. The private ones are, you have to pay. They're
Right.
American. Like
Right.
my brother-in-law, his father was a shepherd. He was poor. He was selling gum, and he got a scholarship to one of the private schools, and now he's teaching at Northeastern physics, and he did his postdoctorate at Harvard. So he worked his way up. And ironically, he got accepted to Williams, but they didn't go because they didn't know who Williams College was at the time. So he went somewhere else. But it's they're But the problem now with America is it's inflation of healthcare and education. I mean, if you look at the Williams Shadow, inflation from the 1980 as a benchmark, inflation in the U.S. is running about 15%. That's what I'm talking about. The Williams
Yeah.
Shadow.
Yeah. No. So that's a real problem for wealth disparity. It really screws the middle class. No
Yeah.
stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So the only way to make money, you need to own your own company. You still get an LLC. You can still deduct your expenses. I just don't see how you're going to make money being a salaried person.
Yeah. That's really tough. Rusty, do you have something you wanted to chime in? I saw you had your hand up.
Yeah, it was because you mentioned Albania, Stavros. Are you seeing, because I believe Soros is also involved in the Albania world? Do you see a lot of investment going there, or
Yeah. Yeah, because it's a laggard. It hasn't opened up, and you think Greece is cheap? Albania is even cheaper. Remember, George, we looked at it to do something. It was like, 5-star resorts for like $80 a night. Are you kidding?
Yeah. Stop. Is put in perspective? Is Albania kind of like? And sorry, I'm gonna. Well, you know what? If someone comes at me, I don't give a shit. Um, is Albania kind
Yeah,
of
I
like?
noticed that, George.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no, but
I've
is
noticed that too.
no, but
Good
I
for
don't
you,
care.
Dilly.
I really don't care. Is Albania to Greece kind of like? I mean, and I know Albania is a separate country, but in terms of economy and stuff like that, is Albania kind of to Greece like what Puerto Rico is to the U.S.?
Kind of, and the Greeks look down on them, which is not a good thing because the Albanians are just, they were really suppressed by, terrible communist regime. You needed a permit just to leave your village. I mean, that's how bad it was.
Ugh.
A lot of people had to climb over the mountains to come into Greece, and they weren't treated very well. But it's now obviously, opened up. There's a lot of Italian investment. It's a beautiful coastline. George, some of the bluest waters, as defined by Google in terms of what blue is in Albania and Greece. These are some of the most beautiful beaches in the world. Are along those coastlines.
that's
So
Wow.
there's
that's true.
so that's
Albania got there's a beach that got ranked at. And I was over there.
that was the number one beach in the world for being blue, and it's right next to the Greek border.
Yeah, I was over there recently in all those countries, in Turkey as well. Yeah, it's just amazing. So this is fascinating for me. Fascinating.
Yeah. So stop.
Fascinating.
Just a second, Dilly. If you want to throw a map of or whatever, people can find their own map. So stop. When I look at the border here, I see Albania. I see North Macedonia. I see. By the way, they've Trump has not renamed any of the oceans here, so we're okay, I guess. But what's the deal with these other like? Speak about just Bulgaria for a second, or North Macedonia, in these other places. Are they kind of like economically disadvantaged as well, like similar to Albania?
No, Bulgaria's on the rise. They're now part of the Sergeant. They're EU fully. They're euros. You can go across the border. I went to Bulgaria. My father was a socialist, right? He was, egalitarian, futurist, science, utopian. He fought in the war, and I asked him, said, "Dad, you got into Stanford Aeronautical Engineering, for." Back in the after the war in the 40s and 50s, why didn't you go there? I mean, but Jesus, stocks and because I didn't want to see war again. He fought in Egypt, he fought in Palestine, he fought in Crete against the Germans, and he just I don't want to see that. He was 18 years old, and so basically, he took us to. My grandmother comes from Bulgaria. She was Greek, but they were thrown out when they had ethnic cleansing. We threw everybody out. They threw us out. So it's like So we went to visit in the 70s, and George, I almost caused a riot because I ate an extra soup. Everything was so measured under the
Oh
communist
God.
regime that it was and they were yelling at the waiter. And finally, I stood up. I was 14 years old, and I said, I ate the extra soup. And it goes, oh, because they thought he stole the food, right?
Oh
So
my God.
and walking around
Oh my
Sofia and
gosh.
Bucharest, with one light bulb. I said, this doesn't look very good because when you go to Salonika, all these lights. And then my dad took me to Cuba, right, in the 70s. And then I went as with part of the hedge fund in the '90s. I wanted to buy property there because I figured,
Right.
it's going to open up, right? And all the
Right.
Florida Cubans are going to buy it. Might as well get ahead of the curve.
Sure.
And then the State Department said, "You're not buying anything in Cuba." And I said, "Okay, I got that." So I
Wow.
didn't, but it was beautiful. A national hotel. You're sitting there, which like the breakers in Miami, and you're literally 90 minutes away. And it was Havana was great. My father's trying to teach socialism. I'm just trying to buy properties. Um, anyway,
But Stab,
Go ahead. Go
uh,
ahead.
oh, I was gonna say, but also like the Yugoslavia, and the like the exiting of Yugoslavia and the way
mhm.
that that region changed, and then hyperinflation. Like you skipped over hyperinflation. Like I remember my grandparents buying property, and then literally the next day they didn't have that same earnings from the property. They couldn't buy gas. Like that's
Yeah.
crazy.
Well, there was a joke back in the when we had the gold fund. We used to tell the joke in Germany when they had hyperinflation that there was to buy a loaf of bread you needed a whole barrel of money. So the guy would bring the barrel of money to get the bread, and he got robbed. They left the money and took the barrel, right? Because the money was worthless. And I have a great investment for you, George. You can double your money guaranteed with using pennies, right?
Yep.
So if the penny costs 3 cents to make, and if Mr. President Trump
Sure.
decommissions the penny, you could take all your pennies, melt them down, and you'll make 200%,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. 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 Wow.
So
Wow.
that's what happens in hyperinflation: is the money is worthless. In Zimbabwe, and we used to carry around for marketing. We had $1 trillion dollar note, right?
Yep.
As a joke. But that's unfortunately, we used to have that in Greece with drachmas. It used to be 30 drachmas to the dollar, then it was 45, then it was 300.
Yeah. Stop
So
it. Stop, as the saying goes. I'm, on Twitter. I'm old enough to remember when. Yeah, so we had drachmas.
yeah,
Back in the day, stop, when you and I first met in the '80s. I mean, there's
yeah,
Italian lira, French francs. I mean, European Deutsche, Spanish pesetas. I mean, these terms don't mean much to many people in the room. But yeah, I mean, this is before we had the euro. It was all. Every
yeah.
country had almost
When I
some
was in
currency.
the village as a kid, back in the late '60s, my dad used to give me 50 drachmas, which was just $1.50, and he said you got live the day with that, and I could eat lunch and dinner with that.
Right.
You can't get, excuse my language, shit for in the island now. It's all full of French people and Germans.
Yeah.
And you go out for dinner, it's almost like New York. Forget about Mykonos. Mykonos is like, forget about it.
Right.
You can't, nobody, no Greeks can, to that earlier gentleman who said, Greeks can't afford it.
Yeah. That's crazy. That's just
And,
crazy.
and we're still going at it.
Yep.
I mean,
Yep.
they're still coming, George. They're expanding the airport, and everybody's,
Well,
they're,
for what you're saying, Stop. I mean, Greece is you. I mean, we've been going almost 2 hours now, but I mean, what you're saying, Greece is still relative to other places, very cheap. You were rattling off numbers before, so
still cheap. It's one of the best wellness values, and that's why people are coming. It's the planes are still full to come here, but the planes to the states are because of the
it was
Trump.
it wasn't last summer. Like it wasn't just Greece, but other places in Europe as well, especially because the dollar was strong. It was horrific. I remember there were stories about they were turning cruise ships away because too many people. They're getting overrun. I mean, I don't know what it'll be like this year, but last year wasn't the tourism season just totally out of
Horrible, yeah.
control?
So Santorini, which is sort of like the one of the top Greece is one of the top destinations in the world. They take 30 million. Americans get 60 million tourists a year. Greeks get 30 million a
Wait,
year.
wait, 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 wait. The U.S. is bigger country as we have. We take 60 million, and little Greece takes in 30 million.
Yeah,
Yep.
George, go
Whoa,
to New York. So
whoa.
So this island Santorini, which is everybody knows, and it's a destination and all that. Now the locals get pissed because they basically come with their cruise ships, right? They don't spend any money on the island. They get all the buffet stuff. They stuff themselves. They go for the tour. They get the picture, and then they go back to the cruise ship. And these cruise ships are big, like 1,000, 2,000 people, which is actually the best way to see the islands. And
Wow.
it's why not?
Yep.
But
You know, anecdote right there. So, my family, I've got family down here in Naples, Florida, and you know, talking about American tourism, especially like with COVID and everything, we had a ton of European travelers coming out to Naples, Florida. All of a sudden, this season, so the Naples season, right? It's like so much quieter, like hardly any Europeans.
Yeah, Alex, I was down in Naples about 6 weeks ago, and I know exactly what you're talking about. And on top of it, and for those of you paying attention to real estate, Florida real estate, along with some other places in the states, and we know real estate's a very local market. Florida real estate, in particular Naples, it was a list of Nate Gurley had a list of like weakest markets, or whatever. Naples is like really
Yep.
falling, and I remember Alex, you probably know that restaurant. They got the best pastrami sandwiches. It was unbelievable. You probably know what I'm talking about.
Is it
And
biciclette?
I can't even, I'll look it up. In any event, we were chatting up with the waitress and the owner, and they're like, "Yeah, now's not a good time to be buying because everything had gone up so much." But this is before the Trump tariff thing started. So you've got like record. I mean, we all see the same stuff on Twitter. Again, Nick Early is the best follow for the data, not the opinion. The data. You look at inventory now in some of these markets. Oh my God, it's out of control. So yeah, and now I kind of wonder, Alex, what's going to happen with, as you say, with European tourism collapsing. It's not just European tourism. I mean, we see all the same stuff. I mean, the last couple of months, inbound tourism or tourism intentions from whether it's Asia, Europe, whatever, it's all like it's all down and to the right. So we'll see.
What surprises me though is it's like as the dollar is going down, like this is happening as the dollar is going down, and technically like we're getting cheaper for Europeans.
Yeah, that's true, Alex. But now I'm going to go back to Stav. Stav. Yeah, okay. So the dollar, the dollar has gone down. Is again on Twitter, like I say, the dollar has crashed to level it hasn't been it since a year. So like the dollar's probably like I don't know, it's flat on an 18-month basis or whatever. But I think even more important than that, and I want to go to you, Stavros. It's just European attitudes towards the U.S. It's like the heck with Trump. It's like the heck with the U.S. So it's a matter of principle. Isn't just a case, Stavros, of people like the hell with the U.S. Like the Europeans tend to be I don't know, I'm generalizing, but it's really stuck in their chaw what Trump is doing to them. They're kind of like giving a big middle finger back to the U.S. in return. No, Stav?
Yeah, I think it started with JD's Vance's speech in Munich, where he just basically lectured the Europeans, and the Europeans have been around for a lot longer than U.S., so they
Yeah.
don't take kindly to people lecturing them about certain things. So they they that's when it started with JD Vance's speech, and then it just snowballed, and they were like, "Why is he like? We're not." Everybody does. They know who the enemy is. It's
Right.
they feel it's Russia. They're more the particular. They think that Trump has thrown Ukraine under the bus. Asking for military. What you helped us and we get paid back and all this other stuff. They figured that he just basically. They think Ukraine is dead. He just threw Ukraine under the bus. So I said if he throws them under the bus, we better fend for ourselves. And if you're Finland, Poland, and all these places, you're basically militarizing. You're getting your draft ready. In Greece, they're doing the same thing. They're getting their reserves together. Uh, uh, so basically, people are just said, okay, I get it. We get it. We got to do it ourselves. And in some ways, Trump is right. They have been getting a free ride. I mean, U.S. has been spending. We got 140 bases around the world. And when I invested in Asia, I was very comforted by the fact that I always had American bases around. Like the only one that had changed that was China, right? So Korea, we have a base. Okinawa, Japan. So even though they had mercantilistic economic policies, they always had an American base there to ensure that world trade or trade would go forward. In China, they took the different route. They said we're not going to do that. And in some ways, even though I'm not a big fan of Peter Navarro, I read his book. He's right. They started preparing for all this. So that's why they have their own satellites. They have their own they want their own logistics. They want their own ports. They want their own trade. And if you
Yep.
look at a map around the world, they've got like I said, 120 different ports around the world. So even in Greece, we have to be careful. And I was that other gentleman talk about his school reunion. 20% of that school is Chinese. They bought those visas and they're here. So you can't just dump them either. So we're kind of caught in a rock and a hard place. Luckily, our ambassador is the ex girlfriend of Don Jr., so that's good. At least we have a direct line to Trump. So
Wait.
anyway, uh,
Yeah, Stab, I got one more question for you. Just because you triggered me by this, what is the what are Greeks or
you
the
triggered
European?
George. Come on, I find
No,
it hard to
no,
believe.
because I'm. Hey, by the way, I just want to let everybody know, Stav is doing this for us. It is 1:24 a.m. in Greece right now. So
Really? Oh my God! I gotta go.
time
No, my pleasure.
time
I've
flies
never
when you're
done a
having
space
fun.
before. I probably never will. I did it for you, George.
No, I appreciate no, but
Aw.
no, but when we
I
do it
didn't even
on.
know how to get on the space. Not
Yeah,
alone.
I know. You and I are going to talk about that later. In any event, Dilly, Stav and I, it's always, I got this, I got this. Well, no, he didn't have it this time. He
No, you know
dropped
what
it.
it was? I never let X have my microphone, so I had to go into settings and
Yeah,
install
yeah,
it.
yeah, 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 yeah. All right, my last question. Then, if anyone else has a question, we're going to close this room shortly. Stav, what do Greeks and then Europeans more generally think of Russia?
The Russian people they love. My mom loved Russia. She spoke Russian, but they understand Putin. They don't trust him.
Okay,
And
so
Russia has a reason not to trust the Europeans because and it's historic, right? When the Tatars used to come in to bang up Europe and the Russians asked for help, nobody showed up. They got beat up. Till one guy in Moscow said, "You know what? I'll take care of everything for you guys." And that's the first czar. And that's how Moscow became the capital. And it paid off this. And then they had their 100. So the Russians don't trust the Europeans. The Europeans don't trust the Russians.
okay, so if the Europeans don't trust the Russians, check. Now,
And don't forget, half Eastern Europe was, under
no,
Russian.
I get it. I get it. I get it. And now, if all hell breaks loose, it's not clear that Trump's going to come to the rescue. So that's a good reason not to trust the U.S. So I get it. So that's why the Europeans feel they got
Yeah,
to
the
start
Russians
defending
weakened
themselves.
by this war, so the Europeans know there's a small window to arm themselves,
Got
and
it.
and I think I sent you this MI6 guy.
Yeah, 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 yep, 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 yep. You know what? Maybe I'll redistribute that. All right, and then okay, and then lastly, so as far as the Chinese are concerned, whereas the Europeans may not view the Chinese as a military threat, and the Chinese have dispensed a lot of economic largesse to benefit the Europeans. Equally, they're attacking a lot of industries where the Europeans have featured prominently. And so, is China viewed potentially as a big threat, or they're handing out the money right now, so people don't really think about it? Like, what's the attitude towards China from Greece?
It's becoming warmer,
It's becoming warmer because China's providing economic support and whatnot.
and they're not asking for things like Trump, who's basically blackmailing people. That's the key word. Everybody thinks the guy's blackmailing.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Oof. All right, Dilly. Final thoughts, or anyone else on the floor? I think we're done. We've been going. I don't want to
Yeah,
say it's
we've been
2 hours.
going 2 hours
Yeah.
now.
Sorry about that.
No,
Yeah.
No,
this
no,
has
no,
been
no, no.
great. Are you kidding me? This has been really interesting.
Yeah.
Yep. All right.
Thank
Thank you for
you so
your
much.
So
time,
This is
especially
great.
yeah,
it's
you
really good,
staying up
and
late.
yeah,
Thanks, guys.
we'll
Yeah.
throw. Yeah, appreciate it, Stav. And again, Stav will be back on June 5, along with a bunch of other favorite characters. So, Stav, I want to thank you. This has been fabulous.
Thank you, guys. Yeah.
And then tomorrow, just list housekeeping. Tomorrow, we just scheduled this, but Samantha Leduc is coming on at 4:15, and then Tuesday we have a Spencer Kemian at 4:15. I don't know if we're gonna have a speaker on Monday or not. I haven't figured that out yet, but thank you everyone for hanging in there with the technical difficulties, and